All right. Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer Savage, Surfrider Foundation. I'm here with you this morning to share some of Surfrider's efforts to ensure that California's beaches are accessible for all to enjoy. These efforts complement the Commission's own education, enforcement, and environmental justice endeavors and are based on the policies enshrined in the Coastal Act. First, we recently celebrated, along with Senator Jerry Hill, the County of San Mateo, and others, the successful inclusion of funding for Tanitas Creek Beach and Martins Beach in the state budget. The opening of Tanitas Creek State Beach to the public will provide an expansive new coastal playground for both locals and visitors, and having money to purchase the easement to Martins Beach will, we hope, motivate the State Lands Commission to act sooner rather than later when it comes to declaring eminent domain and reestablishing the access that has too long been denied. I think about all the families that come from the East Bay and the Central Valley and have been going there for generations. My own husband actually has fond memories of going to Martins Beach with his grandma Dee Dee when he was little, which was a very long time ago. And I can't wait for that gate to be opened and visitors to be welcomed once again. And of course, the Coastal Commission has been such a strong and steady champion in these efforts, so we wanted to thank you for that. I also think a lot about how in this time when our federal administration has essentially declared war on our environment and the majority of the people in it, that we in California really need to double down on ensuring that our state is better than that. And in thinking about the work that Surfrider does in those terms, that translates into increasingly emphasizing not only the letter, but the spirit of the Coastal Act. Surfrider has always fought against tangible barriers to our coast, the gates at Martins and Strands, for example, and we've been expanding our efforts around access to include those less obvious ones. As you know, last year's Access for All report by UCLA found that the cost of travel, parking, and overnight accommodations are major factors preventing Californians from visiting the coast as often as they would like, especially low-income Californians and people who live in inland areas. A related issue that's come to our attention over the past year is the challenges that nonprofit outdoor organizations face when running programs on the coast, particularly in our state parks where they are charged the same use fees as commercial enterprises. This is unfair, counterproductive, and contrary to the coastal and environmental equity the state should be striving for. As you can imagine, this discourages use of our coastal state parks by these programs, which are largely run by women of color and serving inland youth who wouldn't normally be able to get to the beach, much less learn surfing and coastal stewardship. Surfrider is currently supporting an informal coalition comprised of representatives of several of these groups. So far, we've met with state parks and have had an excellent meeting with your staff and with Coastal Conservancy staff. I'm hoping that the Commission will make room on an upcoming agenda for these groups to share in detail their work and the access challenges they continue to face. Finally, what is likely the most profound physical challenge to coastal access, sea level rise and coastal erosion. As the Washington Post described in a story that came out a couple days ago about a new U.S. Geological Survey study, California officials will face an awful choice as the sea rises. Save public beaches enjoyed by millions or close them off with boulders and concrete walls to armor the shore and stop the waves in a bid to save homes. Clearly, this is not news to you or your staff. But the recent heat wave certainly showcases how much every inch of beach counts. In summary, we need to enable more people to get to the beach, even as the beaches themselves are shrinking and can expect it to continue to shrink. So it's quite a conundrum. To that end, we ask you to continue supporting enforcement staff in their quest to ensure free and open public access, to keep weighing social and economic justice considerations in your decisions, to insist on the most proactive and long-term planning when it comes to climate change adaptation, to protect the public's interest by defending our beaches against the impacts of coastal armoring, and to otherwise ensure that California's beaches are there for everyone seeking the joy, comfort, and inspiration of our coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Brian Peoples.
Hi, Brian Peoples, Executive Director of Trail Now. Thank you for the time to speak. Trail Now is a local organization that is campaigning for the coastal trail. We call it the Santa Cruz Coastal Trail. You might know it as the Monterey Bay Sanctuary Trail. We call it Santa Cruz because it's local. It goes from Watsonville to Davenport. The current plan has a train and a trail, and that will result in 35% of the trail being diverted to surface streets. It also will require miles of fences that will prevent access to the coastline, which I know this organization fights for, which we agree with. And it'll also result in 60 trains a day going 45 miles an hour along the cliff and along the cliff by Capitola. So that will be detrimental to the cliffside. Our plan is basically to pull the tracks and put in a world-class rail trail. We won't have fences. We won't have barriers. People will be able to access the trail. There won't be any fossil fuels adding to climate change. There are some decisions coming forward right now, and that is the North Coast Rail Trail EIR is coming out. There's 3 plans. One is a rail end trail, and that goes from Davenport to Wilder Ranch. The other is a trail only. And then our plan with working with the local farmers is a plan that is basically the trail only with a small diversion along the coast. The current plan has miles of fences. It will prevent access to the beaches, and it'll be tied up in litigation, and you will never have that trail happening. The trail only is better. However, our plan is the best because it has the greatest scenic views, has no barriers, least expensive, is in cooperation with the local farmers. They're supportive of it. And so I think it's important that this organization be engaged in what's going on with the North Coast Rail Trail currently being, the EIR is currently being done by the Federal Highway Commission Administration. And so the report will be coming out soon, and we're looking for your support for the Trail Now, the Farmers Plan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Gilliansight.
Now, Chair, Commissioners, my name's Gilliansight, and I'm here speaking as an individual, a long-time resident of Santa Cruz. I've been a strong supporter of the Coastal Commission for 45 years I've lived in Santa Cruz, and when people badmouth you, I've defended the work you do and the difficult decisions you have to make. So I'm here today to express my disappointment in your decision yesterday with regards to the house on the ocean side of West Cliff Drive. This is a much-loved part of Santa Cruz, and basically somebody with $3.9 million can buy it and remove an iconic part of our history. And I was very disappointed in the lack of concern, it seems, from any of you with that history and what we are losing. If you listen to your staff report, you wouldn't even know that it was a historic building. Even when our local newspaper, the Sentinel, covered this issue when the house was first bought, because it was the highest price house for sale, I think, ever in the city of Santa Cruz, they gave it front page prominence and talked about its history, the meaning of it to Santa Cruz. You wouldn't know that yesterday. We didn't even come and opposing that it's going to be torn down and with a wink and a nod, a remodel as the city thinks it is, even though it's a completely new foundation. And what one wall of bare studs left or absorbed into this completely new engineered structure to last a long time, which would seem to be against a non-conforming category or zoning. But we only asked for 2 things that you read into the conditions of approval, and one was to keep the soft blue colour, which, as local historian Ross Gibson said, the house has a wonderful relation with the natural setting. So now we're going to have a very dark brown, burnt finished treatment, but no concern for the wishes or the aesthetics or the beauty of the house as it blends in with sea and sky and fog. And the other thing we asked was about bird strike design, and you didn't read that into the record, so we'll now get probably just glare-proof windows, which don't really cater to the needs of the birds in the Pacific Flyway. And lastly, I guess public access, that we have public access there now, and you're going to put a path down there. So there goes the tide pools, and there goes the shorebirds, as more and more people and their dogs go into this quite fragile area. So, in summary, very disappointed in your decision yesterday. I thought it showed a lack of care. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greensight. That concludes this section of public comment. And we will now go to the legislative report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sean Drake, our legal fellow, will be sitting in for Sarah Christie this month on our legislative report.
No, I had a paper clip. I seem to have lost it. I'll just put them over here. That's okay. Let's put them over there. Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioners. Sarah Christie is on vacation, so I'm happy to deliver the legislative report for the month of July. It's been a busy month in Sacramento. All of the policy committees have finished hearing their fiscal bills, so most of the bills that we're tracking are now in the Appropriations Committee of the Second House, which is to say that the Assembly bills are in the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Senate bills are in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. On July 6th, the legislature adjourned for its summer recess, and it will not convene again until August. So at that point, we'll see whether bills pass out of the appropriations committees and onto the floors of the two houses. Getting into the bills that we've been tracking, I first wanted to give a quick update on the Commission's priority bills, beginning with AB 2864 by Assemblymember Limon, which the Commission took a support position on. That's the bill that would direct the California Office of Spill Prevention and Response to invite the Commission to participate in the Natural Resource Damage Assessment, or NRDA, process for any coastal oil spills. That bill most recently passed unanimously out of the Senate Natural Resources Committee. In fact, it was a Republican that made the motion to pass the bill. The bill has received tremendous bipartisan support every step of the way through the legislature, which is certainly a welcome sight. The other priority bill is AB 2614 by Assemblymember Carrillo. The Commission took a support position on that bill as well, and it originally would have directed the Natural Resources Agency to develop a grant program and informational resources for nonprofit organizations that transport underserved youth to natural outdoor spaces like the coast. That bill recently passed out of the Senate Natural Resources Committee as well, but it did take some amendments. In its new amended form, the Natural Resources Agency is no longer required to develop a grant program, though it may do so. Also, instead of developing informational resources for nonprofits, the bill now requires the Natural Resources Agency to work directly with underserved communities by developing programs that help these communities access natural and cultural resources, educational programming, and other opportunities. That bill is now in the Senate Appropriations Committee. I also want to give a quick update on two bills that the Commission has not taken an official position on, but that we've been tracking and have been in the legislative report for a number of months. The first, SB 1017 by Senator Ben Allen, seeks to phase out the use of drift gill nets for commercial fishing of shark and swordfish. That bill has been amended into a simpler form that would offer financial incentives to fishers who surrender their permit or their nets to the state. That bill currently sits in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. Another bill, SB 1029 by Senator McGuire, would create the Great Redwood Trail, which would stretch 300 miles from the North San Francisco Bay all the way up to Humboldt Bay. That bill is still moving and is also in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. The bill is relevant to the Commission only to the extent that the northernmost end of the proposed trail would be located in the coastal zone going around Humboldt Bay. Although it's a relatively small segment of the trail, we are keeping in touch with the author's office to make sure that they're paying thorough consideration to that portion in line with the Commission's policies. Finally, I did want to mention a few bills that have been added to the legislative report this month. On the report, you'll see them marked with an asterisk, And next to that, there is a link to the actual bill language, should you want to look at that. There are 4 newly added bills in total. 3 of them pertain to the budget. I did want to draw your attention to one of those 3 budget bills, SB 854, which relates to Martins Beach. What that bill does is create something called the Martins Beach sub-account, and then appropriate funds into that account for the State Lands Commission to acquire a coastal accessway at Martins Beach. If that sounds familiar, it's because SB 854 is basically a reintroduction of SB 42 from last year. That bill by Senator Hill similarly sought to provide public access at Martins Beach by setting up and funding an account for the State Lands Commission to acquire an accessway. However, late in last year's legislative session, that bill was amended to prohibit the State Lands Commission from using eminent domain to acquire the accessway, basically defeating the purpose of the bill. So the governor recognized that, vetoed the bill, and now this year's bill, SB 854, is basically another attempt to pass that legislation, but through the budget. So that's SB 854. The other newly added bill I want to mention, which is AB 2447 by Assemblymember Race, is not budget related. It's actually a CEQA bill, and while it doesn't affect the commission directly, we've added it to the legislative report because of its potential to affect projects that may be located in the coastal zone and therefore may come before this commission. In short, AB 2447 would require that any project that would construct or expand an industrial facility, the lead agency under CEQA must provide notice to residents of disadvantaged communities within a half mile of the project site and to schools within 1 mile of the project site. The bill would also require the lead agency to hold at least 1 meeting for residents of nearby disadvantaged communities to provide input on the proposed project. So as you can gather, the general intent of the bill is to provide additional procedural safeguards to ensure that disadvantaged communities are informed and involved in the development of industrial facilities, which historically have had a disproportionate effect on them. So this is just another bill, which we see many of, representing the legislature's growing commitment to bringing justice and equity to these communities. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Otherwise, that concludes the legislative report for July.
Any questions? Mr. Peskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff, it says on page 14 that SB 854 was signed by the governor on June 27th.
That's correct. The budget bills have already moved through the legislative process to that effect.
So this is now law.
Yes, sir.
Director Howell, did you have a?
Well, I guess, I don't know that we're in the habit of recommending amendments to bills, but 1 meeting for disadvantaged communities? I mean, it seems like you could have more than 1, and it might be productive to suggest that more would be better than 1.
We can certainly have conversations with the author's office. Again, this bill doesn't directly affect the commission's program. We wanted to put it on your radar because it could affect CEQA-related projects that could eventually then come before the commission. If the commission, would like to have those conversations with staff, that's certainly something that we could do.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we will go to the North County District. Ms. Detmer.
So we are now at item 6 and the Deputy Director report for the North Coast District. So the written report contains 1 immaterial amendment. I'm not aware of any objection or controversy regarding this item, and so we're looking for the Commission's concurrence.
Commission's concurrence. Seeing no objections, we concur.
Thank you. So now we're at item 7 and the consent calendar for the North Coast District. As I reported earlier, we moved item 7.1A, which is the Noyo Harbor District permit amendment to consent. The Harbor District supports the staff recommendation. We're not aware of any opposition or controversy, and so we therefore recommend that you approve this item under the consent calendar.
Any objection to approving this item under the consent calendar? No objections.
We should have a motion.
Need a motion, please?
Move approval of consent.
All in favor? Anyone opposed?
Great, thanks. So now we're at item 8, which is the Energy Deputy Director report, and I actually don't have any items this month that require commission action, so we can move directly to item 9 and the consent calendar for energy. So again, as I reported earlier, we moved items 10A and 11A to consent. I do want to point out that there is an addendum for item 11A. This is the permit amendment for the Santa Barbara Mariculture Company. The addendum includes revisions to some special conditions in response to concerns raised by the applicant. And the addendum also has some correspondence that is in support of the project. So the applicant supports the staff recommendation as modified in the addendum. And for both of these items, we are not aware of any opposition and therefore recommend you approve both of them under the consent calendar. I do want to point out that Mr. Friedman, who is the operator and owner of the Santa Barbara Mariculture, is here today. I understand he submitted a speaker slip to you and would like to briefly address the commission.
Very well. We also have a card from Mr. Kent Nelson, who is here for questions only. But Mr. Friedman, would you like to come forward?
Yes,
3 minutes enough?
3 minutes, yes.
Perfect.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Bernard Friedman. I own and operate Santa Barbara Mariculture Company. I brought my family here today. It's a very important decision for us. This farm provides the majority of our income, and this CDP will also provide the necessary protections for my family and give us some legal security. I'm thankful for your staff and for yourselves in having patience and investing your time to get this farm into compliance. The complexity of getting a permit and operating a shellfish farm here in California is far from clear, and I feel there are still huge gaps in dialogue between the different permitting agencies. I feel that you need to get together collectively to tell us shellfish farmers what you want and provide a vision and a pathway for our future, and also provide the necessary support for us. Farmers do need a lot of support from their governments to become successful food producers anywhere in the world. And so we just ask, where is California's vision for responsible seafood production? And who's going to take that on? So the more supportive this commission can be, the greater chances this family farm has of surviving, and the pressures are immense. And because I think that harvesting seafood from foreign environments and from other regulatory areas kind of distorts the true costs of living here on this planet. And currently, this country is using other environments and economies to feed Californians seafood, which is both healthy and nutritious. So I think this CDP document tackles just a small fraction of how a farm like this is going to feed its constituents. I think that it takes a lot more than money to feed people. It takes a lot of sweat, blood, and tears. Personally, been doing it for 20 years. We can't spend our way to sustainability. Farming is a very valuable skill that needs to be nurtured. And so this family really understands the gravity of the situation at stake here. And we put our future in the CDP. And so we ask for a similar commitment. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you to your family for being here.
Okay.
With that, we need a motion to approve. Okay, certainly.
I would like to thank you for those comments. I thought that those were provocative and also important in that, and to staff, I think that he raised a lot of really important issues because as, oops, I'm out of time.
You've concluded your comments.
Thank you very much. But So perhaps a response to that, because I don't know what the state of regulation is for maritime farming and for seafood farming. And, I mean, is this something that we could talk to some of our sister agencies about in terms of convening maybe a work group, looking at the situation as it exists today, and really where we'd like to see California utilizing the expertise of the people who do have these farms? Thank you.
I'd be happy to. Well, those conversations are actually ongoing now. We do have a multi-agency effort where we are speaking with the other agencies that have authority under aquaculture. I feel like we're very aware of some of the concerns and constraints that some of these, particularly smaller operators, have that are operating economically more marginally. I feel that our role here as staff, I feel like we have been sensitive to that, and even on this one, just a couple comments on that. There were CEQA obligations that Mr. Friedman had here, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife actually took on the role of actually preparing that document themselves rather than requiring that the applicant actually pay for that work to be done. So that was one example, I think, where the agencies are trying to be sensitive and be creative to find other ways to fulfill some of these legal obligations. And also just in the addendum that we did in response to Mr. Friedman's concerns, I feel like we tried to be, again, creative, flexible here on some of the monitoring requirements. We changed some of the deadlines to give him a little bit more time to do things. So I do believe we're trying to do that here and at the same time address our Coastal Act concerns. We also reached out to him that if over time he's having issues with implementing some of these requirements, to make sure that he calls us. But there's absolutely a larger effort going on in the state amongst the different permitting agencies, and that includes like the Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Water Quality Control Boards, Fish and Wildlife, ourselves, and sometimes the National Sanctuary Programs. And if you recall, a couple of months ago, we gave a presentation to you about how we're trying to bring them all into compliance, because many of them either don't have permits or they're out of compliance with existing permits. So I think we're trying here.
Please don't interpret my comments as indicating that I don't think the staff are trying, because frankly, I think that the staff has distinguished itself in terms of the oversight and analysis and recommendations to the commission on aquaculture, particularly, the oyster farms. So it wasn't meant in that regard at all. It was really to hear from you, are there governmental efforts to really, take a look at this form of agriculture and to make recommendations. And certainly we have such a key role in that because of our Coastal Act obligation. So I want to thank the staff, thank the applicant for coming to comment and for bringing your family, and I'm sure the kids are eager to get over to the boardwalk. So with that, I would support the motion.
Okay, motion to approve the consent. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one opposed or abstaining? Okay, consent calendar passes. So, Commissioner Sundberg.
Just quickly, so in Humboldt County, we recognize the same thing, and we've got the second largest bay in California, and we've dealt with the aquaculture issue, and so what we did is we recognize that these small farmers have a very tough time going through these processes, and some of this is unavoidable because all these agencies have a responsibility to protect the environment and fill out their charge, so you have to get these permits. So what we did is we provided a grant to the Harbor District from the county that let them pre-permit all these areas so that these small farmers would already have a permit in place when they want to go in. And we're hoping that is going to be the answer to these small farmers being able to expand, or new ones coming in that wouldn't have been able to afford to get these permits, and only the big guys can afford to spend that much money on these permits. Maybe the state could provide grants for some of these other ones.
Anything else? With that, we are going to go to closed session. We're also going to take a short break so people can check out, and then we will come back no more than 15, 20 minutes. Yeah, we'll do the closed session first, then we'll take a short break. So maybe 15, 20 minutes, I think, should do it. Mr. Peterson?
I believe so, depending
Okay.
on the
All right.
course of conversation.
Don't tell him not to. Yeah. Okay, we're going to reconvene, and Mr. Ainsworth, Mr. Peterson, will you report out from closed session, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The commission met in closed session this morning and received litigation information and advice regarding Pappas et al. Versus State Coastal Conservancy et al. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Ainsworth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a PowerPoint for this one. Billy, if you pull that up. So last month, in my Executive Director's report, I provided a history and overview of the settlement agreement reached in the litigation case involving the Hollister Ranch Owners Association versus the Coastal Conservancy and the Coastal Commission. Now, members of the public and the commission expressed concerns that that presentation was not an agendized item and did not afford the public an adequate opportunity to fully comment on the settlement agreement. Therefore, we scheduled this informational presentation to provide the public an opportunity to comment on the settlement agreement. Staff prepared a written staff report on the history and background of the settlement agreement and outlined some of the issues and constraints related to the public access easements and the shuttle program secured under the 1980 YMCA Coastal Development Permit. In addition, we provided on our website all of the related court documents and other information related to this case. We also provided an email address where the public could submit comments on the settlement agreement. And to date, we have received over 1,500 public comments, most of which are opposed to the settlement agreement. Now, after I give my presentation, Mary Small, the Chief Deputy Officer with the Coastal Conservancy, will speak about the constraints and issues associated with that original access easements and other matters. So the judge in this case recently determined that because the settlement agreement abandons disputed rights of public access, that public has limited knowledge of the terms of the settlement agreement reached in this case, she believed it was prudent to allow the public to submit motions for intervention in the case. And motions for intervention are due in the court on July 23rd. Now, the facts and the issues surrounding the history and the terms of the 1980 Coastal Development Permit, which required limited public access into Hollister Ranch, are complicated, as you all know. And it is certainly understandable the public is frustrated with the lack of access into Hollister Ranch, and the commission staff and the commission are equally frustrated with the situation. It's been almost 40 years since this permit was approved that required at least some limited public access into one of Hollister Ranch beaches, and no access has been provided to date. It's also understandable that the public is upset that there was no public process involved in negotiations on the settlement agreement with the Hollister Ranch Homeowners Association. Unfortunately, in the context of a settlement agreement, there is usually not an avenue for the public to participate in settlement agreement negotiations. Now, as with most settlement agreements, some compromises were necessary to reach an agreement. And I think the commission and staff would certainly like to see more public access at Hollister Ranch than is provided through this settlement agreement. However, given the facts and circumstances surrounding the 1980 permit that secured some limited access rights into Hollister Ranch, I believe this settlement agreement does provide for at least equal or even more access opportunities to a wider group of persons than was provided under the original terms of the permit, especially for underserved youth. Now, others may disagree with that, and we will hear from those folks later. I would also note that in reading the public comments, some reports in the press, I believe there's an assumption that there was more access required under the YMCA permit than is actually the case. And that settlement agreement is somehow giving up future public access options to the ranch in the future, which is also not the case. So today, I would like to walk you through the permit history and provide some context on how the Commission and the Conservancy arrived at this settlement agreement. And I would remind everyone, this is an informational briefing only, and no vote will be taken by the Commission. So, this may seem like deja vu to some of you, but I'm going to walk through the history again here. And Hollister Ranch, as you see here on this slide, is in western Santa Barbara County, located between Gaviota State Park and the 25,000-acre Coho Halama Ranch, which was recently purchased by the Nature Conservancy. Next slide, please. Hollister Ranch has been an operating cattle ranch for 100 years, and a cattle ranching operation continues to this day. The ranch is 14,500 acres in size and was subdivided into about 135 parcels of about 100 acres in size prior to the Coastal Act. It has 8.5 miles of shoreline and is accessed via a private road and entrance gate, which prevents the public from entering the ranch. Next slide, please. Now, in 1980, the Commission approved a coastal development permit for the YMCA to develop an ocean camp on a property located 2 miles west from the Hollister Ranch entrance gate. And the future camp was to be located on 2 non-contiguous parcels, an inland parcel of 160 acres located about a mile inland from the coast that would contain overnight facilities and include facilities such as cabins, dining area, pool for about 150 campers, and there's a 1-acre beach parcel that could accommodate 50 campers per day. At the beach parcel, the YMCA would construct various improvements, including a beach discovery center on top of the bluff, an access road to the center, and a stairway down to the bluff to the beach. And these bluff top facilities were on an exclusive easement held by the YMCA and were not included in the public access easements required under the 1980 permit. While the Commission found that the proposed camp project would provide public access opportunities, the fact that the users needed to be members of the YMCA and also must be able and willing to camp overnight, the Commission found that general public day use opportunities must also be provided. Therefore, a condition was imposed requiring that the beach parcel be opened up to 50 members of the general public per day. And the Commission also found that the YMCA was establishing a large-scale recreational facility, was supplying a shuttle service from Hollister Ranch Gate, and was providing supervision, maintenance, and cleanup of the beach area. And they also had the capability to operate the YMCA facility and providing for the shuttle system for 50 general day use visitors to the beach. Next slide, please. Now, in 1982, the YMCA satisfied the permit conditions to record both lateral and vertical offers to dedicate easements to the beach, and the permit was issued. And sometime in 1982, the YMCA started some limited construction of the camp on the inland parcel, which exercised the permit. However, the beach parcel was never developed with the recreational improvements, including the beach access stairway, nor the shuttle service was provided. In 1984, the HROA purchased the YMCA parcel and then sold it to a private owner in 1986. In 2013, the Coastal Conservancy accepted offers to dedicate easements, and the HROA shortly thereafter filed lawsuit against both the Conservancy and the Commission. Next slide, please. Now, the vertical access easement to the beach involves some challenges and difficult constraints for providing public access to the beach. The easement from the road follows the creek within a well-developed riparian corridor, which is difficult to traverse, to the entrance of a 10-foot drainage tunnel under the railroad tracks. Next slide, please. Public access through the drainage tunnel obviously raises issues regarding public safety, including the flooding of the tunnel during rain events, low visibility in the dark tunnel, water and debris in the tunnel even at low water conditions, creating hazardous, unstable footing well into the dry season. And also debris removal on an ongoing basis would be a challenge. But I want to make it clear it's not always flooded like this. It is dry during the summer months. In addition, this access way would only afford access opportunities to the most physically fit people. Next slide. In addition, during the tunnel exit to the beach is also a challenge. As during low sand elevations, there can be a significant drop off to the beach that actually, and during the summer months, sand can accumulate and actually block the access way, as you can see here on this slide. And there are no other alternative routes to the beach, as this is the only vertical access easement to the beach secured through the 1980 permit. Now, the Coastal Conservancy has expressed significant concerns regarding the viability of using this drainage tunnel as a formal beach access way, of course, because of these hazardous conditions. In addition, I previously mentioned the shuttle system to the site was built on the premise that the YMCA would be operating a shuttle system to the property to transport the general public to the beach, and it would piggyback, and that would piggyback on top of their shuttle system. The Coastal Conservancy also raised concern about the feasibility and cost associated with operating an independent shuttle system today, and Mary Small will address these issues in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Now, this slide shows the seasonal sand profiles at Corrado Canyon Beach. And during the summer months, there's usually a well-developed sandy beach. And during the winter months, the beach can be very narrow, as you can see on that upper left slide. In fact, there was a bluff top trail envisioned under the YMCA proposal and is included in the easements as well. Next slide, please. So, moving on to the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement substitutes the shuttle and access program as described in the 1980 YMCA permit with an alternative managed access program operated jointly by the Conservancy and the HROA, and includes a license for public beach access at Corrado Canyon Beach over the same area of beach covered in the 1980 OTD. The managed access way under the settlement agreement consists of two access programs primarily targeted at disabled and underserved youth, but other people could, NGOs or nonprofits could access the beach as well through the program. The first is the nonprofit program, which will be administered jointly by the Conservancy and the HROA for educational recreational beach programs for groups of 20 people for 20 events per year, and that program would serve about 400 people a year. The second program would make permanent the HROA's existing K through 12 Tide Pool program and Wounded Warriors program, which would include 24 events per year and up to 20 people per event for a total of 440 users. Now, these programs could be conducted at other beaches in Hollister Ranch that have disabled access and include facilities such as restrooms and picnic facilities. In addition, an annual review of the program by the Conservancy is required to ensure compliance with the settlement agreement. Next slide, please. And this is just a photo of an elementary school group from the Santa Maria School on one of the tide pool events that is currently operated by the HROA. Next slide, please. So under the settlement agreement, the HROA will also grant a license for public access over the same 3,880 feet of beach that was subject to the YMCA OTD. And the access license would extend from the mean high tide line to the base of the bluff. The license allows for passive recreational use, including the beaching of small watercraft, including ocean-going kayaks, surfboards, paddleboards, and soft-bottom boats such as Zodiacs. And access is primarily from the ocean, except for access through the Managed Access Program. And it is difficult to access this beach from Gaviota State Beach. It's a rough ride, and we acknowledge that. The license is irrevocable unless a public entity initiates condemnation action for public access or recreational use. Next slide, please. So, there are potential funding sources to support the proposed managed access programs. In 1982, the legislature added Section 30610.8 to the Coastal Act, establishing an in lieu fee program for the Hollister Ranch with the intent to resolve disputes between the state and Hollister Ranch regarding public access requirements with new development. Now, the written report includes the more detailed discussion of the legislative history regarding this provision of the Act, starting down at the bottom of the page 2 of that report. In pursuant to this provision, the Hollister Ranch property owners are required to pay $5,000 for each new CDP for development on a vacant lot in lieu of providing public access. Unfortunately, there was no inflationary escalator was included in the in lieu fee, so the fee today is the same as it was way back in 1982. The in lieu fee account currently contains $295,000 and is held and administered by the Coastal Conservancy. There's also another potential funding source of $1 million in lieu fees required pursuant to a 1984 CDP issued to Chevron for the Point Agreo project to be used for future public access improvements at Hollister Ranch. And Santa Barbara County holds and administers this fee. Next slide, please. Now, some have asked how this settlement agreement may affect the existing Hollister Beach access plan that was adopted by both the Conservancy and the Commission back in 1982. And this plan was prepared in response to Section 30610.8 of the Coastal Act, which required the in lieu fee, and the Coastal Commission and the Conservancy jointly prepared and adopted that back in 1982, as I just mentioned. The plan called for a phased and monitored approach to opening access to the ranch using the funds secured through the in lieu fee. It proposed pedestrian, bicycle, and van access to the various beaches on the ranch. Phased implementation with up to from 100 to 500 users per day implemented by the Conservancy. Beach facilities were also proposed, and also provisions for the protection of sensitive habitat areas, as well as addressing privacy of the ranch owners. The plan also recognized that a number of access easements to and along the shoreline would be required through the ranch to achieve the goals of the access plan. Now, the only way to secure easements it would be through a cooperative agreement with the ranch owners, which is not likely, or through eminent domain or condemnation proceedings. Securing easements through eminent domain would be very difficult, expensive, and would involve years of litigation. The legislature would have to approve funding for any eminent domain action. In addition, the Coastal Conservancy doesn't have the authority to condemn property, and they cannot use any bond funding for any such proceedings. Furthermore, funding generated from the in lieu fee would certainly not be adequate to secure any access easements to the ranch today. In any event, the current settlement agreement with the ranch would in no way affect implementation of the access plan in the future or any future actions to secure easements for the coastal trail through the ranch. Next slide, please. Now, there are also potential future opportunities to help facilitate public access to Hollister Ranch as required through the settlement agreement, such as completing repairs to the public boat launch hoist at Gaviota Pier, which is planned by State Parks, and this would help facilitate boat access to Carrata Canyon Beach. And in fact, State Parks has submitted a CDP for repairs to the pier and hoist that we're now reviewing. A future concessionaire could also provide the public boat trips from the pier to Carrata Canyon Beach. And partnering with State Parks, the Conservancy, and a nonprofit to help develop overnight programs for underserved youth at Gaviota State Park, which could also participate in the Managed Beach Access Program, would also be a possibility. In conclusion, considering the significant constraints and challenges of the access program under the 1980 YMCA permit, the risks associated with continuing litigation, and the fact that no public access into Hollister Ranch has been realized for 40 years, the commission did agree to this settlement agreement, which will provide limited public access to the ranch through programs that will serve underserved and disabled youths and provide some limited public access to 3/4 miles of beach from the ocean where no access was available previously. Again, we recognize there are a number of activists and members of the public who do not think this settlement is adequate and does not provide equivalent access as required in the N1980 permit, and believe the commission should have simply negotiated much harder for additional access there. I can assure the public that we all negotiated very diligently on this, but some compromises had to be made. Now, we also understand why the public is frustrated with the lack of a public process in reaching this settlement. Therefore, we welcome the court's invitation to the public to intervene in this case, as this ruling is in keeping with the Coastal Act's mandate to provide the widest opportunity for public participation in commission decisions. Now, the public has until June 23rd to submit the motions. I'm sorry, July. Oh boy, that would have been bad. Sorry, you're out of luck. No, the court. Sorry, the court hearing on this, on whether to approve the proposed class action settlement agreement is scheduled to occur on, I hope I get this right, September 10th, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. to be specific. And the public notice regarding the proposed settlement agreement provides additional detail regarding where to file the motion and regarding mailing copies of the motion to the attorneys for the parties to the litigation. And any member of the public interested in filing a motion to intervene should consult with an attorney regarding how to do this. Now, I just have a couple of final observations. I may be a hopeless optimist, but I believe the controversy and public angst regarding this settlement agreement has provided an opportunity to shine a bright light on the historic lack of public access at Hollister Ranch. It has activated the public and demonstrates once again the people of this great state deeply care about access to our spectacular coast. Now, the intent of Section 30610.8 of the Coastal Act was to open up access into Hollister Ranch in a timely manner. Unfortunately, the implementing provisions of that through the in lieu fee were woefully inadequate. I believe the answer to opening up wider public access to the ranch will take a legislative change to provide adequate funding to secure access easements through the ranch through an eminent domain proceedings. One obvious change would be to increase the in lieu fee requirement, but even that would not be adequate to secure easements through there. And to give the Coastal Conservancy the authority to condemn property. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Small from the Coastal Conservancy, and I appreciate her being here. Thank you.
Good morning, and I had some slides as well. As Jack said, I'm Mary Small. I'm the Chief Deputy Executive Officer of the Coastal Conservancy. Let me start by saying that improving public access to the coast for all Californians is a central part of the Coastal Conservancy's mission, and we believe deeply in the right of the public to use its coastline. I have read the public comments on this issue, and I share the widespread frustration with the lack of public access to Hollister Ranch. The Conservancy supports the vision of building a coastal trail through Hollister Ranch and of creating ultimately public access to its beaches. However, the rights that we hold through the YMCA's offer to dedicate do not allow us to build the coastal trail and only provide for limited public access. My purpose this morning is to explain why the Conservancy staff recommended approval of the settlement by presenting the access rights that we hold and what the public gets through the settlement. The Conservancy access rights are, of course, the very issue that is being litigated, but for the purpose of the presentation, I will present them as I understand them to exist, and it was based on that understanding that we recommended the settlement. We did not recommend the settlement as providing adequate access. We recommended the settlement based on the specifics of the litigation, the limitations of the access that could be provided with the interests we hold, and with a consideration of the future risks of continued litigation. And as Jack said, the settlement does offer the first opening of any public access in Hollister Ranch in a manner that will serve a diverse public and can be sustained through time. Next slide, or do I do it? Okay. So first, many members of the public have commented that they would like to see a trail from Gaviota State Park to the beaches of Hollister Ranch. The owners of Hollister Ranch have made it very clear that they are not willing to sell or grant access for this trail. And without a willing seller, the only way to obtain the rights for a new trail along this section of the coast would be through condemnation. The Coastal Conservancy only has the power to exercise eminent domain if we are given that direction by the legislature through the Budget Act. We have not been given that authority, and importantly, not the funding to exercise it. And this is the part of our statute that has that limitation. So let me talk a little bit about the YMCA's offer to dedicate from the perspective of the potential manager of that access way, the owner of it now. The Conservancy's property interests come from this offer to dedicate from the YMCA, and the rights conveyed by the YMCA's OTD were created with the assumption that the YMCA would have built and would be operating a public recreation facility on Hollister Ranch. However, as Jack just went through, these improvements and the services were never created and do not exist. The Conservancy has the right to operate a shuttle on the Hollister Ranch Road from the gate to Quartz Creek, which is about 3 miles. And when the OTD was written, it was assumed the YMCA would be operating that shuttle. The shuttle may operate from 9 a.m. to sunset and can allow a maximum of 50 people per day. The OTD does not expressly convey rights for the public to walk or drive in along the road. At Quartz Creek, the Conservancy has the right to construct a trail to the beach from the shuttle drop-off point. The beach access facilities, again, proposed by the YMCA, were never constructed. The trail from the road to the beach crosses through a very dense riparian corridor and into the drainage culvert that you have heard about under the railroad. The culvert is an unlit tunnel with uneven, slippery footing. During certain times of year, as you saw, the sand builds up at the mouth, and at other times it erodes away. And if you hit it just right, you can just step right out onto the sand. But during the winter, this route will be dangerous and impassable due to the high flows in the creek. And even with significant maintenance, the route will be challenging. We do not think it is possible to improve this route so that it's accessible for people with disabilities. So once the public rides the shuttle, walks through the trail, walks through the culvert, and gets to the beach, there will be no restrooms, no trash cans, and no facilities. The public would have the right to use the 3/4 mile portion of Sandy Beach. The public would also have the same right to boat into that beach as is preserved in the settlement, so to access it from the ocean side. The Conservancy holds about $300,000 of in lieu fees from Hollister Ranch, and as Jack mentioned, there's an additional $1 million held by Santa Barbara County. This is not sufficient funding to improve and maintain this access way and operate a shuttle indefinitely. Even with the county funds, we are not sure we could pay to operate the shuttle for more than 5 years. It will depend on the cost of the trail improvements and the frequency of the shuttle operation. But these are significant costs. So at best, we could provide limited access. The maximum number of people would be 50 per day. The hours would be restricted from 9 a.m. to sunset. The beach will have no restrooms, trash cans, or facilities. And even improved, the accessway will serve physically fit, adventurous beachgoers. The accessway will serve a limited number of Californians, and there is no long-term funding identified for the operation of the shuttle or the maintenance of the accessway. Again, the Conservancy's property rights do not allow the public unrestricted beach access, and they do not allow us to construct a trail from Gaviota State Park. And at worst, we could lose, and then we have nothing. And it is with that understanding that we recommended the settlement. The settlement makes permanent and expands the tide pool program. This is a program for school kids from grades K through 12 and brings students out to visit the tide pools on Hollister Ranch. The primary beach used for this program has drive-in access and restrooms, and the program will be increased to have 24 opportunities a year. The settlement also provides for Hollister Ranch to offer opportunities for not-for-profit organizations that provide outdoor education and recreational experiences to use beach facilities in the property, including groups that serve the youth, disabled, and underserved populations. There are many amazing organizations that organize trips to the beach and have transportation staff and volunteers to support these outings. Creating opportunities for these organizations to access Hollister Ranch would serve a broader population than could be expected to use the shuttle culvert access way. The access program will go to beaches with support facilities and will go further into Hollister Ranch so that participants will access more of the Hollister Ranch beaches. Hollister Ranch would initially offer 7 opportunities in 2019, and this would be phased up to 20 opportunities a year. And each opportunity would include 20 participants plus whatever volunteer staff and support staff are included. Those would be in addition. And then the Conservancy is committing to assist with the outreach to let groups know about these opportunities and to use the funding to help support organizations that want to use these opportunities but need financial assistance to cover the very significant travel costs to get to Hollister Ranch. And finally, the Conservancy will meet annually with the Hollister Ranch HROA to evaluate the program and ensure its compliance with the settlement agreement. So in conclusion, if we win, public access will be limited, will serve a limited part of the public, and will be very expensive to operate and maintain. If we win, we expect that we will continue to litigate, which will delay any public access at all. And if we lose, there will be no increase in public access, no access to Hollister Ranch. We agreed to settle as the best of several bad choices. The settlement provides for some expansion of public access through these nonprofit programs and allows these groups to access the beaches with appropriate facilities. I understand that the settlement does not provide the level of access that the public expects and deserves. The Conservancy supports implementing broader public access. Unfortunately, even with the rights we hold from the YMCA's OTD, we do not have the property rights that we need to implement that access at this time. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Small. Thank you, Mr. Ainsworth. We'll now open the public comment, if that's what your pleasure. All right. Our first speaker is Susan Jordan, who has 2 speakers donating their time, so a total of 9 minutes.
No, actually, we were provided a 20-minute presentation.
I see. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
And I will be part of the organized presentation, but we will start with Phil McKenna, and then Mark Shatilla will follow, and I will wrap up.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, we can start with PowerPoint. Wait, the Shatillo.
Madam Chair, fellow commissioners, and the staff, my name is Philip McKenna. Thank you for scheduling this informational briefing today on short notice. The public has shown a strong interest in this issue, witness 1,500 emails that the Commission has received. The public appreciates this opportunity to appear before you and communicate our concerns regarding the failure of the Hollister Ranch Settlement Agreement to address longstanding public access issues. Excuse me. I have been a member of the Gaviota Coast Conservancy, a board member for 20 years, and I've served as its president, and I am currently the chair of the Land Use Committee. However, Today, I am here representing 6 organizations who are listed on your screen that object to the terms of the Hollister Ranch Settlement Agreement. The coalition consists of the organizations on your screen. The coalition has also prepared a briefing book for you with documents that I hope is useful for the commissioners in understanding this complex issue. The Gaviota Coast Conservancy was the only group that appeared before Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors in 2013 requesting that the county accept the YMCA OTD, which was on the verge of expiring. The county refused, so the State Coastal Conservancy accepted the OTD, causing the Hollister Ranch Owners Association to file suit against the Conservancy and the Commission, and here we are. The coastal trail through the Hollister Ranch is a statewide objective, and it has been 36 years since the legislature specifically directed the Coastal Conservancy to implement as expeditiously as possible the public access policies and provision of the Coastal Act at Hollister Ranch. This was outlined in the adopted Coastal Access Program for Hollister Ranch. I was a member of the GABPAC, the planning organization organized by Santa Barbara County to develop the local coastal plan for the Gaviota Coast. In that plan, we approved, excuse me. Bill, we'll get you back. Okay, I'm fine. In that plan, we approved the coastal trail that runs through Hollister Ranch and around Point Conception up into Dangermont Preserve, terminating in Halama County Park. That trail map is going to be before your commission for approval next month. The PAC found that to be an appropriate solution to this issue. Let me digress for just a moment and maybe be a little more philosophical than most. But a proclamation by Roman Emperor Justinian in the year 530, 1500 years ago, provides the historical basis for our complaint. By the laws of nature, these things are common to all mankind: the air, the running water, the sea, and consequently the shores of the sea. There is still no access to the shore of the sea at Hollister Ranch, and this agreement provides the public no relief. Susan Jordan of the Coastal Protection Network will discuss the failure and misuse of the in-lieu fee to facilitate planning and construction of the coastal trail through Hollister Ranch. But let me now introduce first Mark Shatillo, counsel for the Gaviota Coast Conservancy, who will summarize the coalition's objections to the settlement agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Mark Shatillo. I'm the General Counsel for the Gaviota Coast Conservancy. And as Mr. McKenna indicated, there's a coalition of organizations that are very concerned about this issue. We have been engaged in Hollister Ranch access issues for the last 5 or 6 years and are well aware of the constraints of the YMCA OTD. And we share with staff the frustration over the lack of progress in accomplishing access across all of Hollister Ranch. The OTD only concerns a part of it, but it is a very important moment for the Commission and for the community to raise our voices and to take the steps necessary in order to accomplish what was intended to be the access at Hollister Ranch. We've stated a number of specific objections to this settlement that I'll go through in order: that the access is unsafe, that the beach that's offered is narrow, that the road access is actually the most important thing in the OTD, but it's the thing that's being given away, and that this enables the diversion of the all-important in-lieu fees, which are really the key to being able to accomplish the access that we're seeking. So the agreement itself puts the public in harm's way. The area that the public is expected to paddle from Gaviota State Park out to Quartz Beach exposes a paddler to a number of canyon mouths, and these canyons can have, on short notice, sundowner winds that blow 25 to 40 miles an hour straight offshore. And so a paddler who is attempting to traverse to this section of the beach is very prone to a pretty hazardous situation. You're also putting people into the swell window on these boats that can make it very difficult and hazardous. And when you get to the beach, there's actually limited dry sand that's there. There's testimony in the record. Mr. Brown submitted an email on July 4th, and he related his anecdote of his son almost losing his life going on this exact section, paddling under good conditions to get out to Hollister, but in paddling back, the winds changed, and as they began to approach Gaviota to finish the course, the wind blew them off course. A boat capsized and began to be blown out to sea. This is something that's not particularly uncommon on this stretch, and unfortunately the settlement agreement doesn't provide for an appropriate mitigation of those risks, and I think that you're inviting the public into harm's way. There's an image here of somebody trying to land a kayak at this beach. The swells are large, and this was a summertime, not surfing conditions when people will be trying to go out there when the waves would be much bigger. And finally, when you get to the beach, as you've seen from some of the other photos, there is very little. This photograph was taken at a minus tide. Today, the tide will hit 7 feet on this beach, so it will be 8 feet higher than is shown here. And if you look at the very margin of the bluffs, there is a very limited amount of beach that's actually there. So, and I just have to add that I have walked in the tunnel last month. It was not slippery. It was not clogged with debris. It was one of the better tunnels that I've traversed. As a surfer in Santa Barbara County, you go through these tunnels all the time to access the beach. We're accustomed to it. You bring a flashlight or a phone with a light, and that's how you traverse these tunnels. It's not a hazardous situation. I would far prefer to navigate that tunnel or to take my 90-year-old mother through that tunnel as opposed to putting her on a kayak and paddling her for 3 miles and asking her to land on that beach. A second defect associated with the settlement agreement that we object to is the managed access program. It has been crafted by Hollister to only benefit a very narrow category of individuals. The general public has been excluded from this benefit altogether. Further, if it weren't the categories that are written into the settlement agreement, there is unfettered discretion on the part of Hollister Ranch to be able to choose who can come in and who cannot. And I think we all know what that means. You've heard from staff that Hollister Ranch has made it very, very difficult for the public to access these beaches, and I cannot expect that that's ever going to change. But significantly in the staff report, in the 1982 Hollister Access Plan, it was reported that Hollister was allowing these groups to come to the beach on an average of once a week, 52 times per year. That number somehow got reduced and down to 20 as their claim of the current practice, modern day, and then increased up to 40 or 44 as a benefit of the settlement. Well, we think actually the baseline is 52, and that actually the settlement represents a reduction in the amount of public use of through the managed access program for those individuals. But more significantly, as you're going to hear from Ms. Jordan, this settlement agreement enables the wasting of the in-lieu fee programs by subsidizing Hollister Ranch's management of this program. We heard from Ms. Small. She stated that the in-lieu fee funds were to be used, in her words, for travel by the managed access individuals to the Hollister Ranch. Well, in fact, what the settlement agreement itself provides for is, quote, the managed access program, quote, shall be funded with Coastal Conservancy funds from the in-lieu fee program. So it is not just the travel, but it is in fact the entire program. And that's where, as we look at our goals of accomplishing access across all of Hollister Ranch, that $1.295 million is essential, because that's funds that can be used to accelerate the acquisition and lay the groundwork that's needed to accomplish the kind of legislative changes as well as the practical changes that we need in order to accomplish our goals here. The last element of the agreement that we find odious is the poison pill. If there is any material lack of enforcement of any section of the settlement agreement, the entire settlement agreement is thrown out, including this managed access program. If there is an effort by the state to condemn Hollister Access, which staff has told you is the only way it's going to happen, then all this goes out the window. So you are bargaining for nothing. And so it's our strong belief that this is not a deal for the state. This is a deal for Hollister Ranch, and one that your commission should take act to extricate itself from. First, we'd ask that you don't sign the license agreement. The settlement agreement is a conditional settlement agreement. It is not effective until the license agreement is executed by all the parties. The commission can decline to execute the license agreement, and the settlement agreement itself goes away. Secondly, you could support intervention. Director Ainsworth said that the commission welcomes the public's intervention. We'd like to see that in any legal pleadings in response to applications by the public to intervene. Thirdly, and most significantly, we ask that the commissioners direct staff to initiate an action program to be able to complete the coastal trail through the Hollister Ranch. That is that is the tool by which we will see public access, and we strongly encourage your commission to give staff the direction to pursue that so that we can go down the path that was outlined in terms of the legislative and financial changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we're just going to give Billy a second to get it up. So, thank you. I appreciate that because I really want to get through this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the in lieu fee program that has been in existence for the last 35 years. The in lieu fee program was designed by the legislature to fund a subdivision-wide public access plan at areas like Hollister Ranch, also think Sea Ranch. But a funny thing happened on the way to this settlement. Suddenly, those in lieu fees were now required to be redirected to fund the much more restrictive private Hollister chaperoned access plan. And the 1982 plan this commission adopted was left in the dust. And I'm guessing that was not inadvertent on behalf of the plaintiffs. And unfortunately, the very title of this program has left the impression with many that all a Hollister Ranch owner has to do is write a check instead of providing public access. That was not the intent of the legislature, and it was specifically not the intent for Hollister Ranch. Okay, short story. In the early days of the Coastal Act, when Hollister landowners came in for permits, the commission required them to individually provide an offer to dedicate, so the public would be assured of future access to the coast. Well, property owners in Hollister Ranch argued that they could not and would not offer an OTD because they were in a subdivision and did not have clear title to do so. So they sued, as they have done many times since, and then the legislature crafted a solution for these special areas. And one of what I call no good deed goes unpunished moments created 30610.3 that allowed individual landowners to receive CDPs and proceed with construction if they wrote a check to fund public access on a subdivision-wide basis. The clear and unambiguous expectation was public access would be provided. Hollister continued to resist, and in 1982, the legislature added what I call the Hollister Amendment, which set the in lieu fee at $5,000 in exchange for subdivision-wide public access. Well, it's 35 years later, and Hollister has been busy utilizing the check-writing provision to create estate-like properties with multiple residences, guest houses, barns, underground parking garage structures, fractional shares, and more, but there's still no public access at Hollister Ranch. All right, this is my favorite example. How on earth is that possible? Well, here's how it works. I'm a Hollister Ranch owner. I want to build a house, a guest house, whatever. I submit an application to the county. The county looks to see if I paid the $5,000 in lieu fee or not. And then the county makes a finding of consistency that looks more or less like what you see on the top. That basically they've paid their fee and public access requirements have been met. This particular CDP has this particular property has 4 CDP applications for close to 18,000 square feet of development with one $5,000 in lieu fee. And I love the underground parking structure. However, The actual LCP policy that applies to this CDP says that the commission has to certify, that's key, that the public access provisions have been met. And I, for one, do not believe they have, and I do not believe that you can make that finding. One might argue that in the early days, that was to be expected, not 35 years later. But there's very good news. In a twist of fate, we learned last week that Rancho Cuarta, that's the YMCA parcel, the inland parcel, the OTD parcel, a defendant in this litigation and a party to the settlement had filed 2 applications at the county in 2015 and 2017 to build a residence and a bridge. Yes, again, the YMCA parcel, defendant, party to the settlement, extinguishing the OTD. So those CDPs were approved by the county in early June, but just as the appeal period was about to run out last Friday, Commissioners Peskin and Groom filed an appeal of this CDP based on inconsistency with LCP Public Access Policy 215. Thank you very much. It was a momentous moment. That's kind of redundant, but nonetheless. So now for the first time in decades, the Commission will be able to review how Santa Barbara County has been implementing this policy and the in-lieu fee program. And when you look at their staff reports, which I'm happy to provide you, the finding for all of these permits that have occurred for all this development out of Hollister Ranch takes up about this much on the page. It's really a rubber stamp. So after sitting here for the last 6 years, I know that this is a commission that is dedicated to upholding the Coastal Act. I mean, I see it every meeting. But neither this settlement or the in-lieu fee program accomplishes these goals. I'm amazed that this has been allowed to go on for 35 years, and I really do think it has to stop. Things might stop if Hollister Ranch didn't continue to get permits routinely at the county with no one appealing them. So we respectfully request that the Commission withdraw from the settlement agreement, not oppose intervention by the public, as your settlement agreement requires you to do, direct staff to do a thorough analysis of the failure and misapplication of the in-lieu fee program, and direct staff to develop and implement an action program for the completion of the coastal trail through Hollister Ranch. 2 more things I want to raise with you now that I have a second left. Sea Ranch. Sea Ranch was the other area that came under this 30610.3. They claimed the same thing, subdivision. They didn't want to give public access. Go to Sea Ranch's website now. They say, welcome to the public. Here's where you can park. Here are your 6 public trailheads. And please respect that these are private roads, private residences, private trails. Please respect our privacy, but welcome. Have a good time at the beach. And they give you a downloadable map. That's the difference between Sea Ranch and Hollister Ranch. And in terms of the numbers of access, that got me a little hot under the collar. The OTD promised 50 people per day. That's 18,250 people a year. Hollister gets to have, per day, 3,240 people by their CCNRs. That's what they're allowed to have. They have a system where you have 12 people can be in the house, and then the 12 guests, just trust me, it comes out to 1,182,600,000 people they're allowed to have on Hollister Ranch a year. The settlement, if you're lucky, you're going to get to 880 max. But what you have to understand, you don't get to that max to 2024, and they have the right to say, oops, we don't like this, it's not working, we don't want to do that many events. So it's a bad deal. You shouldn't go forward. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for that presentation. Now we have a number of additional public comments. We'll start with Donna Senover.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Donna Senower, and I am here speaking on behalf of the Santa Barbara County Trails Council. The Trails Council is a 50-year-old nonprofit that advocates for trail access to all habitats in Santa Barbara County. Our mission is to protect public trail access and promote public engagement in land stewardship and trail use for all types of outdoor recreation. This includes ensuring the right of all people to reach and responsibly enjoy the California coast. The 8-mile segment of the Gaviota Coast through Hollister Ranch presents one of the most significant opportunities for planning and obtaining high-quality coastal access in the entire state. The natural beauty of the Gaviota Coast is a unique treasure that we must share with all. Decisions made by the Coastal Commission will not only impact coastal access for the rest of our lives, but also those for our children's children. Considering that the California Coastal Act has been in place for over 40 years, it seems strange that today we should be faced with a pending settlement that is not in the interest of all Californians. The California Coastal Act does not identify who should and who should not have access to our beaches. It does not discriminate for or against any one group. Selecting winners and losers for coastal access sets a precedent that can only have adverse consequences. The settlement agreement before you sets the stage for coastal access issues to be resolved by granting access to narrowly defined, quote, preferred and, unquote, groups as a way to exclude the general public. This is a bad policy and encourages institutionalized discrimination. We respectfully request that the commissioners give the strongest consideration to rejecting the proposed settlement for 2 basic reasons. First, it would set a precedent that could be used to deny access to more beaches and bluff tops along the coast. When protections of the coast is relinquished, it will be impossible to reverse. Second, it would be a dead end to our aspirations for the California Coastal Trail to connect through Hollister Ranch and the north coast of Santa Barbara County, the longest and wildest reach left in the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jennifer Savage.
Hi. Let me start over. Hi, Jennifer Savage, Surfrider Foundation. I'm speaking on behalf of Mark Morey, who is a 27-year resident of Santa Barbara County who's been accessing the Cuerda Canyon stretch of coast by foot or boat for over 2 decades. Mark cannot be here today, but he wanted to give some insight and context into the proposed ocean access as described in the Hollister Ranch Settlement Agreement. As part of the settlement, the public will be allowed to enjoy a few extra feet of sand on the beach at Cuerda Canyon. However, to access this stretch of beach, a person would need to be able to swim, kayak, paddle, or ride an inflatable boat starting from the nearest public access point, which is roughly 3 miles away at Gaviota State Park. In the settlement agreement, these are all presented as reasonable means to access that remote stretch of coast. But as you go west along the Gaviota Coast toward Point Conception, the ocean conditions change rapidly. It's incredibly naive to think that a casual member of the public could simply embark on a pleasant trip up the coast in all but the very calmest of conditions. This stretch of coast is subject to incredibly intense winds that get funneled down the numerous canyons in the area and come up without warning. These winds blow down the 4 canyons that a boater would encounter on their way to picnic at Cuerda Canyon. From the beach, the launching of a kayak, surfboard, or paddleboard is relatively straightforward. Beginning to the beach of the canyon requires the time and stamina to cover the 6-mile round trip, so a motorized boat normally makes more sense. For years, there's been a crane on the pier at Gaviota to launch boats for fishing and surfing, but it has been subject to regular vandalism, and following recent storms, the pier is now closed awaiting repair. A lack of pier access for boats has required beach launching of boats to get up the coast. Gaviota is effectively in the wave shadow of the region around Cuerda Canyon, which allows for an easier beach launch, easier being a relative term. To launch a boat from the beach, 2 to 3 strong individuals drag the boat and the engine, which together weigh over 200 pounds, down to water's edge through soft sand. After getting all the gear in the order, including safety equipment, one stares at the ocean to find a gap in the waves. When this happens, everyone charges out as fast as possible to row or start the engine and try to get to deeper water before the next wave. A single wave can flip the boat. Another, even more significant risk is that the waves can be 3 to 4 times bigger at Quartz Canyon Beach, making a landing and relaunch only possible by experts. To land, first you wait for a set of waves and ride in on the back of the largest one without going over it as it breaks. Then you jump out and drag the boat up the beach before the next wave washes over the transom, filling the boat with sand and water. Once that's done, you can finally enjoy lunch. You will then repeat the launching steps, but with much bigger waves that break further from shore. Back on the water, remember those incredibly intense winds that blow down the 4 canyons. Since the winds blow out to sea, lightweight inflatable boats can and have run out of gas fighting their way back to Gaviota, requiring rescue to avoid tragedy. In the end, if everything works perfectly and you make it back alive and intact, it is still incredibly difficult for even the best boat teams and in no way a reasonable means for the general public to access that remote stretch of coast. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Gilliansight?
Chair and Commissioners, my name's Gillian Greensight, and I'm Chair of the Sierra Club Santa Cruz Group Ventana chapter, and I'm here representing the Los Padres chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'd like to read the statement from the Sierra Club into the record. The Sierra Club has a significant interest in protecting public access to the coast. We provide a very extensive program of hikes, backpacks, service trips, and many other outdoor activities to connect people with nature. Public access to the coast is a critical part of our outings program. The public's right to access the ocean is guaranteed by the California Constitution, and the California Coastal Commission is charged by the Coastal Act to maximize public access to and along the coast. However, 36 years after the legislature specifically directed the State Coastal Conservancy to implement, as expeditiously as possible, the public access policies and provisions of the Coastal Act at the Hollister Ranch, there is still no public access whatsoever to any portion of the 8.5 miles of beach fronting Hollister Ranch. The YMCA offer to dedicate OTD is, to our knowledge, the only OTD that exists that could be used to provide public access anywhere at Hollister Ranch. The YMCA OTD is admittedly limited in scope, but if effectuated would allow up to 50 members of the public to access the Quartz Canyon Beach at Hollister Ranch overland per day. The ability to access this beach overland is especially important. First, the public already has the legal right to access the beach from the ocean up to the mean high tide line. The small amount of dry sand open to the public at Quartz Canyon Beach will disappear as sea level rises, so the only permanent public benefit that can be gained from the YMCA OTD is access by land. I'm going to skip to the end because time is going. The next section talked about the dangers of access by sea, and that has been mentioned before. Given the importance of the potential public access rights at issue, it is critical that the public have an opportunity to weigh in a substantive way. Accordingly, we ask that the Coastal Commission first not oppose intervention by the public in the Pappas versus State Coastal Conservancy et al. Litigation. Second, direct your attorneys to withdraw from the settlement agreement. And third, direct your staff to immediately develop and implement an action program for the completion of the coastal trail across Hollister Ranch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia Verweel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patricia Verweel. I'm coming here as a mother, a grandmother, and a teacher. I live in Riverside, desert and hot, and I teach Native American students at Sherman Indian High School. 3 weeks ago, I was lucky enough to spend a week with my family camping at El Capitan State Beach, where my love for the beach was reaffirmed. But the following week, I learned of what's happening with Hollister Ranch. And I was so amazed, distraught, that I was properly horrified enough that I was willing to spend 7 hours driving up here to express my dismay. How can I impress upon you the necessity of having public access to all California beaches? The California coast is a magnificent asset to all, magnificent asset that must be preserved for all of us. Access by boats and kayaks will not work for many people, certainly not me. Being a non-swimmer, terrified of the water, it is impossible for me to consider getting in a kayak and landing anywhere. So that's not possible. I can hike, and I could hike the Gaviota Trail. I could do it very easily. Closing off any section of the coast to private access sets a terrible, horrible precedent. Please continue to protect the California coastline for all of us.
Thank you for coming today. Kathleen Hamilton?
Good morning. My name is Kathleen Hamilton, and I too have driven 7 hours from Riverside to address this committee. The ability to access Corda Canyon Beach by land is extremely important. If we deny land access, it becomes a private beach. As my grandson Alex said, well, I'd like a private beach. Perhaps we all would. But the California beaches belong to all, and your job is to keep it that way. Thank you.
Steve Ray. He has, Mr. Ray, you have another speaker, so you have 6 minutes.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Steve Ray. I'm here as Executive Director of the Banning Ranch Conservancy. We have a direct interest in this because we have been promoting Banning Ranch as open space available to the public with coastal access opportunities for all, and we have been working toward that for 19 years. We still are working toward it and are hoping to be able to move forward with that. And the coastal access here, I know there's a long history of issues and many complexities to this issue that has resulted in this settlement. And let me preface before I continue my remarks that the great deal of respect I have for your staff. They're remarkable people. I don't know how they get everything done that they do. And for this commission, although I have a rabid respect for the Coastal Act itself, and that takes precedence over my respect for anything else. With that, the Coastal Act is pretty clear about access opportunities for the public and ownership of that beach area up to the mean high tide line for everybody. My question to begin with is, how did we all blow this? We blew it. Somehow along the line, a group of wealthy, many famous people got exclusive access to a significant portion of the beach of California. It's a beautiful area. I've been lucky enough to go through there on the Amtrak, but that's the only way I could get in. It's remarkable that area has been closed off. This settlement agreement strikes many members of the public, matter of fact, most members of the public that I've talked to, as that if you have enough money, if you're famous enough, if you're willing to fight it out long enough, then you'll get your way. And it certainly seems that they have once again gotten their way here with Banning Ranch, with Hollister Ranch, with this potential settlement. The previous speakers, I would like to incorporate, incidentally, by reference, all of the previous comments that have been made into my comments. The previous speakers have outlined some of the issues with this settlement. They've also outlined some of the potential ways to deal with it. and I would hope you would take their comments and their suggestions seriously. It also distresses me that this process for the settlement was done out of purview of the public. It lacked transparency. It certainly lacked public participation, and the fact that the arguments were made in court that to the judge that the public didn't need to be there, that they represented the public. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a member of the public, as is everybody else here, and we all would like to have that representation directly ourselves too, and participation and the transparency. So that I don't understand that. Fortunately, the judge decided that the public did need to participate and did need the transparency and involvement in this, and has set up the system that we now have, allowing intervention and everything. So we are going to do everything we can, and certainly work with the other people who are moving forward with this to try to secure the transparency, to try to make sure that the public has an opportunity to participate in and impact this potential settlement. Hopefully the judge will deny the settlement, which the judge I know is provide tentative approval, but the judge can deny the approval, and that would kind of resolve this issue for the meantime. But beyond that, there are the methods that Susan Jordan pointed out that the commission can take and hopefully will take regarding this. This settlement, as my daughter, who's an attorney, when I talked to her about it, she used her best legal phrase to describe it: it stinks. And so, I know that's legal jargon I don't understand, but I can tell you that it has been very problematic for all of us out here. I would hope that as the commission moves forward, you find a way to resolve this so that public access can be preserved or even opened up. And to Ms. Small of the Coastal Conservancy, and first of all, I appreciate the grants that I've received from the Coastal Conservancy in the past and look forward to getting more in the future. A little plug there. I hope that's okay. But I know the Coastal Conservancy is hampered by what they can do, and hopefully the legislature, we can all work with the legislature, and I would encourage everybody out here in the public, as well as commissioners and public officials, to work with the legislature to provide the funding and the authorities to make sure that this land is opened up to the public and provides the funding for those purposes. So hopefully we can resolve this. I don't know, I understand it's very complex, but we have to make the fight. If we don't make the fight, we never have a chance of winning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. Judy Alexander.
Good morning, or is it afternoon already?
Still morning.
My name is Judy Alexander. I'm not the mayor of anywhere, nor am I an official representative of any group. I'm simply a coastal lover. I've lived on the coast, two places, Malibu and Santa Barbara area, just above mean high tide line. So I get what the owners of Hollister Ranch are loving about their privacy. No noise, no crowds, no people walking around, total and complete privacy and ownership of the beach. I get it. However, I feel very grateful to live in a state which has initiated the Coastal Act, and I am very happy that there are people such as yourselves who have been available through the 40 years that it's existed, been willing to protect and defend the right of the public to utilize the beautiful areas that we have all along the California coast. So thank you for that. As far as the settlement is concerned, great for the few nonprofits that would be able to use it, great for the underprivileged, et cetera, and the tide poolers and so on. It's great for them. But in fact, the focus of the Coastal Act and the focus of your efforts, I would hope,
would be to provide access to the public. I don't belong to any of those groups. I'm just one of the everyone, one of the public, and there are a lot just like me. And we would be willing to walk through drainage channels and the like in order to get to the beach there. So what I would encourage you to do is not to roll over and play dead, because this is really complex and really difficult and requires courage on your part and lots of effort and work and money from somewhere, which hopefully will evolve. I would encourage you to go forward for public access, not just to this little beach, but as others have suggested, to that whole 8-mile area. Thank you very much for all of your efforts. Carry on.
Okay. That was our last public comment speaker. I want to thank every one of you for being here today and making such important remarks. As the judge suggested, the public should be intervening, and so thank you for being part of that public. Does anybody here want to make comments? Commissioner Vargas?
Thank you. First, I want to acknowledge, as our chair did, the comments from the public. I really appreciate it. I don't have anything kind of prepared or anything like that, so I'm going to go a little free form, so please pardon me. There's a few items that I just kind of wanted to have a discussion about and figure out what, if any, course we can take either now or in the future to kind of advance some of these topics that have been brought up, and that, quite frankly, a few of us on the commission have been contemplating for a while anyway. You know, we seem to be a little bit, as much as we praise the Coastal Act, there are items in there that seem relics to another time, and perhaps were made under the duress or leverage of some wealthy folks from Hollister back in the day. One of these items seems to be the $5,000 in lieu permit fee that was kind of enshrined into the Coastal Act for properties at the Hollister Ranch, in the Hollister Ranch area. And that dollar amount hasn't changed. And here we are, from 1970 to 2018, and that dollar amount hasn't changed. So in essence, it seems to me, from reading the Coastal Act and also from hearing from the public from Santa Barbara County area, that if you are a Hollister Ranch parcel owner, you can move forward with any type of development, seeking a development permit, and you can get away from any type of public access requirements with a simple in lieu fee of $5,000. It seems woefully inadequate, and I don't know what we can do about it other than encourage the legislature, if anybody's listening in Sacramento, to address that and see if we can change that. As we saw from the Coastal Conservancy's presentation, as well as our staff, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars in lieu fees over the last 30, 40 years that we've collected. That could probably buy us about 5 feet of access, I think, if not less, in the Hollister Ranch area. So we're woefully underfunded and inadequate to do any type of access programs or acquisitions out there, even if we wanted to. And I think part of the reason is this lower $5,000 in lieu permit fee. So I can keep going, or I can maybe ask staff for their thoughts or responses on what, if anything, could be done to engage the legislature in that type of conversation, or is this something that we can contemplate, some type of initiative or access from our agency for the next legislative session?
Yes, Commissioner Vargas, Yes, there are things we can do through the legislature, encourage the legislature for future legislation with regarding either modification of 30610.8 or other legislation, and we can certainly pursue those avenues. And we've already started pursuing some of those avenues, so there's a lot of focus on this, and legislators are interested in seeking some sort of good outcome here as a result of this.
I appreciate that, and I would suspect that many, if not most, of my colleagues would also would champion that idea as well as probably would the members of the public.
And I just would also add, we could use your help in that area as well.
Happy to help. That's why I'm signaling that. I think another thing that is a little discouraging to hear is, again, for various reasons, although some of them I assume are probably a little sinister, the agencies involved in this are not able to acquire land so easily in Hollister Ranch, through certainly via condemnation, because of limits that were imposed on them legislatively. This seems to put us as agencies at a disadvantage. It certainly puts the public at a disadvantage for making any type of inroads into this area. Again, same concept and same idea. Is there a way we can make a push with the support of the public, as we have been making a push up north with Martins Beach, to see some funding dedicated towards some type of substantial acquisition or condemnation in this Hollister Ranch area?
Certainly. Like we said, and as Mary Small indicated, providing the Conservancy with the authority to condemn property for access easements would be a great step, as well as providing the funding necessary. The funding necessary here would be pretty significant. It's at Martins Beach, it's a much shorter distance. Here we have 8.5 miles of coastline. It's a big challenge, but certainly worth the effort, I believe.
Where there's a will, there's a way, and I think this is really important, as has been highlighted through public comment. You know it's a problem when folks from Malibu are complaining about access issues in Hollister. That's an issue. That's a problem. A question for staff. It seems like the Coastal Act language has somehow been manipulated at the local level to allow folks at Hollister to obtain their CDP, their coastal development permit, with this $5,000 in lieu fee. And I think it was the official organized presentation that highlighted this, and folks kind of just the county automatically checked the box that you fulfilled your public access duties or Coastal Act duties, and move forward. Is there a way we can, as we did when we saw that development was kind of moving kind of out of control in Venice, we hit a timeout button and kind of decided to review things very, very closely in Venice. Is there a way we can no longer allow that process to continue to occur in Santa Barbara, so that if a Hollister Ranch property owner wanted to find a CDP or wanted to pursue the obtainment of a coastal development permit, that we would automatically require them to come in front of us and explain to us how they would have an actual managed access plan contemplated either individually as parcel members or as the Hollister Ranch Owners Association?
The only way to get the permit actions from the commission is to appeal the local permits. And all of the parcels in Hollister Ranch are appealable to commission. And as Ms. Jordan pointed out, 2 commissioners have appealed a permit for a single-family home on the Coretta Canyon property. The question is, one of the challenges here is that, well, if we appeal it, then to what end? We're constrained, the commission is constrained in the sense that we don't have authority over the actual fee. Clearly, the intent of both the statute and the LCP is to get access provided expeditiously in Hollister Ranch. The problem is there's no implementation there to effectuate and to actually realize access there right now. Well, that's where a legislative change would be necessary to get the necessary authority and funding in order to make that happen. Now, can the commission appeal a permit, and then it was up to you to, you could start denying permits up there. That leads to some issues with regard to, takings and things like that, and some legal issues, which I'm not going to get into. But there are challenges there as well. So, but it's, there are ways to apply pressure in many ways.
Yeah, listen, I totally understand that, but it almost seems that the collective behavior of the Hollister Ranch community has amounted in some ways to kind of a takings in reverse, where they're absconding with the public's ability to access what is public beach. So I think we should be pushing to do whatever we can to question any CDPs that are contemplated in this area if there is not meaningful and substantive access plans contemplated in those development permits. Now, my last point is really a question at this point, because I think this has been noticed and agendized as a informational item, so we can't really make any action. But there are a lot of things that have been pointed out by the public that make me feel uneasy about the settlement agreement. And our process for deliberating these things in closed session makes it so that I really can't discuss much of the details of what we contemplated and how we crafted our strategy. But I was not privy to some of these final notes from the settlement agreement until recently, and they make me very uncomfortable, and they make me very nervous. And I sympathize and appreciate the public's input on this, and if there is a way to do so, I'd like to have a discussion with staff to kind of contemplate what it would mean or how we would go about the process of withdrawing from a settlement agreement.
Anyone else? Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I think Commissioner Vargas actually articulated a lot of what needed to be said, and I wanted to start by thanking, this is 798 of the almost 1,456 comments that we got, or at least we've probably gotten more by now, so it's probably exceeded 1,500. Which is extraordinary. I have not read every single one of them, but I've paged through. They're not form emails. Each one is different. And many of them are really quite touching and moving. And the fact that people are coming all the way from Riverside, 7 hours, to Scotts Valley, California, to make those statements, I think is really the fundament of what the Coastal Commission is supposed to do relative to transparency and public comment. So I cannot thank those of you who came today and the almost 1,500 people from around the state of California who expressed that. I also just kind of wanted to know, has staff read each and every one of these comments? Do we know that?
Yeah, Milwaukee has, and I've read a good number of them. No, I'm really moved by them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I share Commissioner Vargas's, I think discomfort is an understatement. But I do think there is a silver lining here, which is up and down this 900 miles of coast that this incredible act has us not only protect, but to encourage and create public access on. It has refocused not only the Commission's interest in it, but I think the public and the media's attention to it. And so this is an opportunity. Yes, it's less than ideal settlement. Yes, the Commission was between a rock and a hard spot. But I think that together going forward, we have some remarkable opportunities, not only at Hollister Ranch, but other places we saw yesterday, Opal Cliffs, which some of us went and took a look at yesterday afternoon. And it was remarkable going past Pleasure Point, hundreds of surfers and people walking. You get to Opal Cliffs, there were 2 surfers in the water, 5 people on the beach. That's not what democracy and bringing people to the California coast is about. So I share Commissioner Vargas's nervousness and look forward to finally getting some public access at Hollister Ranch moving forward, whether it's legislatively, whether it's through condemnation, or whether it's through mature deliberations and negotiations with the 134 property owners at that ranch.
Mr. Brownsy? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to associate myself with the comments of the 2 commissioners who have spoken. As many of you know, public access is the absolute bedrock and core principle for all of us who sit up here. That is what we have been charged to protect and advance by our appointing authorities, but more importantly, by the Coastal Act. And there are moments when the law and historical and just, facts prevent us from being able to completely realize the goals of the Coastal Act. And this is really one of those cases. But I think that I want to really underscore how we have given this a lot of thought, and we do see it as an opportunity to refocus public attention on those few places in our state where the public access is denied in a way that is contrary to the beliefs of all Californians should have access to one of our most beautiful resources, which is our coast, and that all individuals, regardless of where they live, what their physical capacity is, and how long they can stay and visit, it is an essential component of what makes us Californians. So and again, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank every single person who came here. We know, because of the 1,500 comments, that represents thousands and thousands of Californians. And we want to hear from everybody around the state, because we want to know that, in fact, our efforts to protect and perhaps in the future liberate some of these coastlines will meet with the public's support and the public's ability to walk those beaches, to swim in those waters. And so I think we want to communicate in the strongest possible terms that while this was not the case that we would ever point to as a good case, sometimes you're stuck, as Commissioner Peskin said, between a rock and a hard place. But we don't intend to stay there on behalf of you. So
Thank you.
Commissioner Luevano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to echo the comments of my fellow commissioners, all of them. I won't repeat them because I know everybody wants to get out of here. One of the questions or issues that I wanted to ask staff about or raise is with regards to where we are now, which is post-settlement. We do have an obligation, ultimately, assuming that that's signed, to enforce any violations, right? And it would be helpful if staff could articulate what our challenges or what our needs in terms of being able to do that. I know how thinly spread our enforcement staff already is, and it would be helpful to understand what it'll take to do that.
Do you mean with respect to the settlement agreement or
Yeah.
more globally?
Yeah, no, with,
Okay.
with respect to the settlement agreement.
Chris and Jamie, can you?
I think there are a variety of potential remedies, but there are also real-world constraints as well. Certainly, the settlement agreement itself provides that the court has ongoing jurisdiction, so the court has the authority to enforce the terms of the agreement. So if there are violations of that, there'd be remedies by seeking court enforcement of the agreements. Also, violations of the agreement could constitute violations of the Coastal Act's public access requirements. So the commission does have enforcement authorities there. And we do have very real world limitations in terms of ability to carry that out. We have limited staffing, limited resources. We're spread thin statewide, very difficult challenges in terms of having access onto Hollister Ranch. So that, I don't want to sort of make it sound like if there are problems, it will be easy to resolve and enforce those problems. This is a challenging situation. There are tools, but I think in the real world, there can be very real challenges in using those tools.
And I would like Lisa to
has more she would like to say.
add to that.
Chris said, Mr. Peterson said much of what I was going to say, which is that although theoretically we can enforce permit conditions, this is not a settlement agreement. I mean, this is a settlement agreement that effectuates legal rights for the commission, but it's not one that was done through the enforcement program, so it doesn't have stipulated penalties and some of those other provisions that you're maybe used to saying. Chris is right that we could enforce it as a matter of contract or as a matter of a violation of the Coastal Act. But frankly, this is a very remote area. It's very difficult for us to get access. It would be difficult for us to verify or pursue violations here. One thing that I have talked to the Attorney General briefly about was that if there are any amendments made to the agreement, that we could try to, I'm getting a, maybe I won't say anything more on that front, but that is certainly something that we would be interested in trying to assist in implementation of this agreement insofar as we're able to do so. But I just wanted to be honest about the difficulty of doing that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and because obviously this is not the only instance in which we're trying to ensure access, and I hear, pretty consistently from staff how thinly spread our staff is and how more resources would be helpful. And I hope that the legislature is listening because that's obviously as a commission, one of our top priorities. We talk about it all the time on our budget subcommittee meetings, so I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And this is another area where legislation may be helpful, and we've discussed having increased authority for inspections and information gathering statewide, not just at Hollister Ranch, and that would certainly assist us here in terms of implementing this and enforcing this kind of agreement.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Howell.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and well, I agree with a great deal of the comments of my fellow commissioners. One was slightly made me uncomfortable, Commissioner Vargas, your comments regarding looking at Hollister Ranch in terms of their permitting. Let's treat them like everybody else. That's what I think is important, that's the policy of the commission, is that we look at things up and down the coast, we treat everybody the same. And I want to make sure that your comments weren't misconstrued by anybody. I'm not thrilled with this any more than anybody else is with this settlement. I'd like to look at it as there's some silver lining to this, is that it's refocused the commission, I think, and the public statewide on what a jewel Gaviota Coast is. And we need to protect it. And we have had some wins over the years. I can remember a terrible meeting. I'll try and be brief, Commissioner Groom. But we had a terrible meeting in Santa Barbara that went on for hours and hours, and like 12 hours. And basically the fear was that Goleta was going to expand to Point Conception. And that hasn't happened. I mean, Gaviota is still being protected. We have examples of great stewardship. Halama Beach Park has expanded. We've got the purchase of the Bixby Ranch. I mean, that's an incredible gift to the people of California. I hope that those examples are what comes from this new focus on Gaviota, and that going forward, Hollister Ranch follows their examples, and you know, in a couple years, we'll have public access there.
Commissioner Uranga, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Commissioner Groom. I too want to express my gratitude to all those individuals who drove a long way to come here and share their concerns about Hollister Ranch. Certainly we view it as a commitment from them to make us, as the Coastal Commission, responsible for protecting the coast, and that certainly is our mantra. That's what we want to do. It brings focus, renewed focus, to the importance of this commission and our stewardship in terms of what we do to protect the coast. And while we might have a setback in this area, it certainly is an opportunity for us to refocus and re-strengthen ourselves in terms of what our mission is and why we're here. And we are here because we are volunteers ourselves. We come here because we love our coast. We want to protect it. And while we may have not been successful in protecting this part of the California coast, we certainly have successes everywhere else where we are basically being the stewards of our coast. So while we might not be happy with the outcomes of what has occurred here today, or occurred a few months back with the settlement, I think that the most important thing that we have to do here today and for us in the future is to continue to keep our eye on the prize, and that's the prize that California coast is and offers to everybody. And it's a refocusing of our efforts. It's getting our opportunities to share our concerns with not only the public, but with our legislators as well, because they need to be aware that there are some fixes that they need to look at in terms of how we can improve access. And that's the basic purpose of the Coastal Act, is to maintain and ensure that coastal access is available for all, and not just for the few. So I want to thank my fellow commissioners for their service here today, as well as our staff. They do a phenomenal job, phenomenal work in trying to keep all the moving parts together. But there's nothing more successful than being able to negotiate, to talk, to meet, and to come to a consensus as to what we need to do to ensure that our coast is accessible to everybody. So I want to thank you.
Commissioner Fastinos?
Thank you, Chair, and members of the public for all of your input. I think that my fellow commissioners have all said this very well, so not only those of you that are here today, but everyone who cares about this, obviously, and has submitted comments statewide, and we understand that this is a critical issue. I agree that it's been a hard road, obviously, to get here. Settlement agreements are never easy, and appreciate all the work that's been done by both the Coastal Commission staff and the Coastal Conservancy urgency in this matter. Having an opportunity to address this issue through a legislative process is clearly the remedy that we need to focus on now, and I would hope that the public would really get that message today and understand that that is the best vehicle for us to see the public access actually come to fruition. We have to have the authority and the funding to be able to accomplish this, and the only remedy for that is legislative action. So I would just reemphasize that and encourage us all to focus on those positive outcomes that, in particular in California today, it's an opportunity that we have. Clearly the public, by their passage of Prop 68 recently, all of their support for coastal access issues, we have a real leveraging point right now that we can try to get this done. So not that it's going to be an easy lift by any stretch of the imagination, but we are pretty well blessed right now with a legislature that really understands these issues, and I would just encourage those people in the public that can have access to their members to try to encourage something to happen as soon as possible. So thank you again for your passion and continued support for our coast. I really appreciate that.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. There's no doubt that, Commissioner Baker? Sorry.
The reason she didn't notice is it's very rare for me to speak on mic in these meetings, but my boss, the state controller, has been dealing as chair of state lands with the Martins Beach issue for the entire 3.5 years that we've been here. And if she didn't understand public access before that, she does now, and in a positive way. And what I want to say is that for 3 years, we've marched through a series of legislation, bills being vetoed, getting accounts set up, arguing about what's the most creative way to do this so that things are in place to move if you need to do that. And I think in this situation, I didn't ever notice that the representatives in the legislature from Santa Barbara were shy on coastal issues. But I really think this needs to be a creative and deft solution, not just rush in and have somebody introduce a bill that mandates something that blows the lid off of all of this. What we've been able to do with Martins Beach is really talk about what do we need to do to position ourselves? What other actions can support that? And so if I'm being a little bureaucratic here, maybe that's part of who I work for, but we need to be deft about what we pursue in Sacramento. And it may be a series of steps and it may take a period of time, but I don't think there's any lack of commitment to move forward by anybody who's here. Thank you.
Okay, we face a daunting task, but this commission has never shied away from daunting tasks, tough issues. We will continue to pursue this. Again, thank you all for the members of the Gaviota Coast, for the Coastal Conservancy, and for those wonderful people who came up from Riverside this morning. But thank you all for being here, and we reconvene next month in Redondo Beach, and I'm sure there'll be more on this topic at that meeting. So have a safe trip home, everybody.